Earlier this month, Attorney General Todd Blanche told faith leaders he's working to make the Supreme Court's decision on Dobbs permanent, in his words, across the country, rolling back abortion access even in states that have laws protecting it. But not every Republican is on board, including GOP Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, whose new book focuses heavily on the court, specifically Justice Clarence Thomas. Cruz appeared to buck Blanche's comments in a wide-ranging interview with me yesterday, ahead of the release of that new biography titled Going Further, The Incomparable Clarence Thomas. Watch. Is that not anathema to a states' rights view of that issue?
Look, as a practical matter, the consequence of Dobbs is abortion is now decided at the state's level. And that means each state, and I'm a federalist, I believe that's under the Constitution, that's where abortion should be decided.
So when the AG says that, is he wrong to start setting a federal standard?
Look, I don't know what the AG said on this, so I don't.
I can tell you, he said that it's taking longer than we want to make that the law of the land, but he's working, he says, hand in hand with federal health agencies and the White House so that Dobbs' decision becomes permanent in every single state.
So the Department of Justice doesn't have a direct role in making Dobbs permanent. I think the court has decided abortion will return to where it was the first 180 years of our nation's history.
I want to bring in now the co-host of Morning Joe's 8 a.m. Hour and staff writer at The Atlantic, Jonathan Lemire. Thanks for keeping some of your old hours to come back on way too early.
Thank you.
I thought this was a fascinating moment, just given the ways that Cruz himself is an anti-abortion advocate, and yet even here is drawing the line around a DOJ that was being, I think, activist in the eyes of many abortion advocates, but even others who say, well, wait, that's not a state rights approach to abortion. The Supreme Court can decide Dobbs, but states can make their own rules. And I thought it was fascinating to watch Cruz lay out that he doesn't think that's DOJ's role here.
Yeah, I mean, I think you set it up really well with the background here. Cruz, of course, advances himself a legal scholar, writes this book about Clarence Thomas, certainly believes in the Supreme Court. And also, it stands in contrast to what we have seen from Trump 2.0, which is extraordinary expansion of executive power.
Exactly.
To have the executive branch be in charge of everything. And now, of course, heading into this midterms, even floating the idea of the nation's elections, which we know is the job of the states, not the federal government. And this is Cruz kind of trying to tap the brakes on that a little bit. Certainly he's not one to give up any more power that Congress has already advocated to the West Wing, but also suggesting, wait, there is a role here for the judiciary. This shouldn't just come from Maine DOJ. This shouldn't just come from the White House. This shouldn't just come from the executive branch. This should be a states' right answer. It is a more, in some ways, conservative answer. And of course, I think, Ali, as you and I know, everything we think that Ted Cruz says right now, we have to look at least through the lens of 2028, where he's at least thinking about it in a field that would be wide open if J.D. Vance opts not to or stumbles out of the gate.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think every time we see someone put a book out at this point in the year before we get into 2027, you have to wonder, okay, what is the book for? In many cases, they're biographies. In Cruz's case, it's a biography just not of him. And I think the focus on Clarence Thomas led us to a conversation about the courts, a conversation about Dobbs, other key rulings. But it also led us to a conversation about where the Republican Party goes next, because he's got the book, but he's also been busy on the campaign trail lately, which made me wonder about where he sees his party going next and where he'll be as part of that debate. I want to play that moment for you. You've been busy this primary season. In some races, your endorsed candidates have even beaten some of Trump's own endorsed candidates. And I wonder what that tells you about where the party is as it turns the page from Trump.
Yeah. Look, my philosophy on endorsements is I support the most conservative candidate who can win. So I'm interested in both. I look at, number one, what's their record? Have they been a conservative? Have they been principled?
Do they have to be MAGA?
They have to have a path to win. And so there is no never Trump lane.
And I think Cruz himself stands as such a testament to that, right? Because we remember 2016 at the convention, Cruz as really the last bulwark against Trump taking the nomination. And then, of course, he's fallen in line. I mean, it's been a pretty stunning arc. But hearing the way that now he might have, in some places, a better pulse on the MAGA movement, even if he's not calling it MAGA, is stunning.
If President Trump is watching that, isn't going to go over too well. I mean, he doesn't like it, of course, when anyone in the Republican Party tries to create a little deadline, a little daylight from himself. But we are seeing that from Cruz. And I think it is right. Like, I think at this point, one of the criticisms that even of Trump right now, and even some in his own party are making this quietly, to be sure, is that he has lost touch with what actually voters care about, including in his own base. Because, look, like him or not, Al, you and I well know, Trump has always been very adept at knowing what at least a sliver of the country, a portion of the country really cares about. And he's played to those issues. That's why his approval rating is always never sinks too low, because his base is always with him. But now he seems consumed with vanity projects, with legacy projects. People look at the tariffs, the war. Nothing's actually fulfilling his signature campaign promises to bring down prices. So I think there is some unhappiness that he's lost the touch with the rest of the people. He's barely done any travel. It's picked up a little bit lately, but Trump isn't out there the way he used to be. And now here is Cruz, Senator Cruz, who, does seem to have a little more of a feel for where the party is right now in 2026. And again, look, the idea of a Ted Cruz presidential campaign is one that we've been through before. Trump famously nicknamed him Lion Ted. Frankly, one of his better efforts in terms of nicknames.
Had an early one.
And he had the whole routine with it.
Yep.
But this is, again, Cruz at least keeping the door open ajar, thinking about what could be next for him in the post-Trump era. And I think that's whether Cruz himself dives into 28, we are seeing a party finally starting to think about what it could look like when Trump's off the stage.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that part of the interview later on Morning Joe. But I think when I'm wondering what a MAGA heir might look like, I do think that Cruz has parts of that feel more authentic to that coalition than someone like a J.D. Vance, who has held varying positions before ultimately falling in line with Trump. Obviously, so did Cruz. But from a policy and conservative perspective, I wonder if you think he's a more natural person to slide into that lane. I mean, he won Iowa in 2016.
He does. He definitely has the conservative credentials. Now, he also, look, again, as you noted, he was a bulwark against Trump in 2016 for a while. So maybe he doesn't quite have the arc that J.D. Vance did. I mean, he didn't call Trump America's Hitler like the vice president did. But Cruz, he did some as atoning. And let's be clear, for the last decade, he's been a pretty loyal foot soldier. He's broken with him occasionally on a few issues, but not a lot. He has largely been in line. I mean, it is possible that he could be an heir. Now, I don't think we should overstate Ted Cruz's charisma or political talents. Like Donald Trump, again, could take command of a rally stage and lead a movement. I don't know that Ted Cruz has shown that he can do that. But if it is a wide open GOP field, if Vance comes out, stumbles, or maybe Cruz thinks about it. If not in 28, then in 32.
Yeah, certainly. He was leaving the door open when we talked about this yesterday. But you see the books, you see the trips to Iowa, you see the policy posturing, even as subtle distinctions. He's doing the things that you do at this point in the calendar. Jonathan Lemire, do the things that you do. We're going to see you on Morning Joe in just a little bit. Thank you for coming on.